You're listening to Cloud Security Reinvented, a podcast for security leaders with a focus on the cloud. Learn best practices from fellow security professionals and how they disconnect from it all at the end of the day. Cloud Security Reinvented.
Good morning, or depending on when you are in the world, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. Welcome to Cloud Security Reinvented. I'm your host, Andy Ellis. Before I introduce our guest for the week, a quick word from our sponsor, Orca Security. Orca provides agentless security and compliance for your public cloud infrastructure, enabling you to detect and prioritize security risks in minutes, not months. I'm here today with Roland Cloutier, CISO at TikTok. Welcome, Roland.
Andy, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. You know, across a security career, and I think you and I have had some pretty long careers, hopefully we've grown and, we've matured, but the world that we're in has changed a lot. And so today I'd like to get some insight from you, especially in light of the transition from the on-premise world that most of us started in to the world of cloud that has basically become the default model for IT infrastructure. But first, I want to talk just a little bit about your career journey, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great, Andy.
So I think there's this classic stereotype of how security professionals used to operate, which is they started in law enforcement or working for the government. And they're very rare, but you're one of them. So what was that like doing law enforcement before moving over to the security side of the house?
Yeah, I mean, I've been so blessed to have such a, diversified background with my training in the government and the military. And really, I did start out on that physical side, aerospace defense, anti-terrorism, things of that nature, and then migrated into federal law enforcement. And of course, when you have, felony cases that involve technology, all of a sudden that, your understanding of technology becomes really super important. You go from using technology in the field to, affect a mission to needing technology, to really, stop bad things from happening and investigating crimes. And the jump happened, I think, when I was over at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs doing a lot of fraud crimes, and so many things were happening on computers. We had to go over to the Air Force to OSI and have them help us out on forensics and the old bureau cart teams, helping us do network collections and things of that nature. So, a good friend of mine had suggested, you seem technically, astute. Maybe you should go back to school. And I did that. I actually went back to school and had a good time. I was the guy in the back of the classroom, remotely turning off other people's computers, learning, to the edge of what I could take it in a safe and protected environment, and just enjoyed it and realized I could take my discipline in so many different areas, understanding technology. And that's what I did. And then, kind of the rest is history. Worked for, large companies like EDS, where I learned consulting and learned different industries and building teams. And I worked for EMC and critical manufacturing. And then, of course, on to ADP for a decade, helping, protect worldwide payroll technologies. And then I got the call for, TikTok saying, hey, would you ever consider thinking about, protecting, these consumers from so many companies around the globe? And just a huge opportunity for me to continue to learn. And that's how I got here.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I want to explore, though, like you were basically went from law enforcement into consulting and then into a CISO role. Like that's got to be a hard transition from being on the outside telling people how to do it, but now you actually have to do it.
And I do a lot of transition work with people coming out of law enforcement, government, and military now to help them through that transition, because the language is different. The focus is different. You have, when you're in these global protection and law enforcement organizations, there's, you're outside of companies, you're dealing with people all over the world and global critical issues. And then all of a sudden you're inside and you're trying to use the same language, you're trying to use the same approach. And I was just fortunate. I had amazing mentors, and, I had people in business that appreciated my capability for defining and executing solutions to hard problems. Then they wanted to see me successful in business. So they took the time, they stopped, they educated me on what, CEO leadership teams needed, what business leaders needed. Over time, getting mentors in the area of boards and sitting down with general counsels that I've worked with or for, and really understanding not just how to present or how to explain something, but the details of the why.
Yep.
And so I think as leaders, the more of the details of the why that we give to the people we're mentoring, especially people coming from different industries, really, really helps.
Yeah, that's, I think, a really great way to think about it, right? That details of the why. How has that shifted for you? You went from ADP, who probably not known as a hotbed of rapid innovation, although a lot of technology changes there during your tenure, to TikTok, which is basically one of the most agile businesses, or has to be, given the competitive landscape there. Like, what's that been like for you?
A learning experience. It's been exciting and fun. I came here to be able to protect the last sunniest corner of the internet. I'm like, I'm a missions and like you, Andy. We grew up in this space.
Yep.
I'm a mission center guy. So I love knowing what I'm going out to do. And that thought of, there's a billion monthly users on platform, and making sure it's safe for them to operate. My kids, make sure it's safe for my kids and my mom that wants to use TikTok, and feel that level of accountability. But the level and capabilities of technology, like I've only dreamed about, like I only imagined about my career. And don't get me wrong, ADP does some really amazing things on the technology, but it's a very myopic or specific area in payroll where, at TikTok, it's from videos to safety to security to, I mean, we use machine learning capabilities within our security organization to do, advanced bot defense, to do,
Mhm.
on platform influence operations detection. Like we're doing things in the technology space I never knew I would see in my career, to be honest with you. But it's really, you got to be ready for that speed and feed. You got to be
Yep.
ready for that high level of operational tempo that we have. And moving my leadership style and capability to ensure that I enable that for the team has been one of the biggest learning opportunities for me, I think.
That's a really neat way to look at it. Some of those capabilities sound like things that were science fiction just a few years ago. And so maybe that drives into this question, which is, so cloud has become more prevalent across your career and certainly in these transitions. So how has that affected how you approach security?
So I think in general, it's really this changing world and the changing job of our profession as CSOs into this discussion around, it's not just about enterprise or cloud, it's about business operations protection. And if you think about the digital ecosystem that is business today, it's what is the environment you operate in and how do you defend it? And it's going to be different, right? Depending on your mission space and what you're doing. I went from a very mixed environment to a, nearly solo cloud environment, but it doesn't change. How does
Hmm.
my business operate? What is the methods we deliver certain things to market? How do you develop protection infrastructure capabilities and controls over that? And how do you operate, monitor, respond to it? I think that's the number one base thing that we have to remember in this space. Now, I think, you know, going into cloud service providers, and whether it's our own clouds or it's GCP or Amazon or whoever, there's some opportunities with the underlying infrastructure to really drive that scale and drive demand. But it has to be integrated into your control operations and infrastructure, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a huge important understanding, is how are you using advanced next generation technologies to connect those ecosystems of defense and protection and response? And how are you doing for compliance and validation? The big thing in my area, a lot of people think it's, it's cool media, it's a video, everyone's using it. But there's a reality that it doesn't matter, what you're delivering. There's jurisdictional and regulatory requirements you have to adhere to, and you have to be able to prove it. It can't
Hmm.
be, just, "Oh, trust me, we're doing it." It has to be show me. And when you're doing it across that many environments, that integration point, that ability to show what we call controls assurance is critically important.
So, if I looked at your industry from the outside, I think, and you may have just touched on this, which is like, I bet we've got a lot of assumptions as people who are not inside TikTok or any big social media business about what cloud and cloud security is like for you. What's the biggest way you think that we're wrong? Like, what would surprise me if I had your job for a day? What's going to be my biggest surprise?
I think it's scale and regionality, right? Like I think people forget forget when they migrate to the cloud and they start putting production operations into that environment, is the level of scale that takes
Yep.
to accomplish it. I was at a CSO meeting in West Palm Beach this week with a bunch of really, amazing CSOs and CISOs from across industry, and we were talking about the scalability concept and the ability to deliver assurance, like we were talking about a minute ago. The technologies that drive that also give us the capability to do really great security. I mean, think about container infrastructure for a second.
Yep.
The ability to spin them up and tear them down and ensure that that device is consistently patched, like within X number of days. It doesn't
Yep.
matter. When it comes down, it goes back up. It's verified, validated, and it's patched. And remove the patching issue from your environment. Like, can you imagine doing that for first time in your life? Like, that capability exists today if you build it and do it right. So I think what would surprise most people is the scale this can drive for you, but also the level of security. And I think maybe the last thing in this area is regionality. I think
Yep.
cloud gives you the capability with data defense and access assurance controls to agnostically drive regionally specific requirements in an environment that's interconnected. And again, do it at volume and at scale. So I think a lot of people would, say, I didn't know that cloud was a resolution for that.
Yep. I think that is a place most people don't think about cloud beyond, oh, I put it in, US East 1 and I'm done. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's so many independent parts of cloud security, specifically to our area, right? Like security, risk and privacy enforcement capabilities. You can, most of the cloud environments, either you can get, third-party cloud capabilities that integrate into the native cloud platform, or the providers are creating them now
Yep.
as a mechanism that it actually enables you to do something newer, faster in transition rather than trying to migrate those enterprise standard control capabilities that you've been delivering for years.
If I look back to the pre-cloud era, I think there were a lot of rules we followed and practices that were norms. Which one of those most resonates for you still today?
Oh, how about this? Always keep learning. like static folks that are static in this environment are going to wither away. But as like on a daily basis, these amazing companies and technology platforms are delivering net new capabilities. Sometimes I'm embarrassed when my teams are talking and I did not know that that was actually even possible, right? Like as practitioners, as professionals, as leaders, you got to keep up on it, especially, as technologists, you have to continue to learn. So I don't think that ever changes, first and foremost. And I think knowing your environment, right? So this comes back to understanding your assets, this understanding the tools within the environment you're operating that gives you the protect, detect, respond,
Hmm.
recover type methodology capabilities. Understanding that and understanding those critical unique services that help define your controls assurance, that help monitor, your environment, making sure you understand this is still all about risks and priorities, Andy. At the end of
Yep.
the day, this is what we do is still about risks and priorities. So making that applicable, making that framework applicable to a wider, larger technology ecosystem in cloud, I think is important. And admitting your gaps. And part of that is saying, wow, I don't have that visibility anymore. Or, oh my, we wouldn't know that if it bit us in the face. So we've got to go back and solve for that. Listen, you can't protect what you can't see. Doesn't matter if it's cloud, data center, physical security, people, it doesn't matter, right? Like, so get that transparency and visibility, get those risk programs in place, and be truthful with yourself and your business about it.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think the scariest moment for a CISO is when you're going to put up on your chart, whether you're briefing your board or just one of your executives, like, here's an asset class. I don't know how big it is. I don't know what the security looks like on it. I'll have to go figure it out, but I'm going to tell you it exists before I do the hunt. And I think it's a terrifying moment. We're like, well, why don't you know? Well, I found out about it yesterday.
How about this, Andy? My favorite question I tell people, the scariest question I ever got in a boardroom that changed me forever was from an extremely smart CTO that was on one of the boards, and he said to me, "But Roland, how do you know?"
Right.
And it didn't register at first. I'm like, "Well, we did this," and he goes, "No, no, no. How do you really know at the end of the day that that's what's in place across that large of a geography?" And I took a step back and I said, "That is a great, great question. I think I need to come back to you," right? Which was humbling, but at the same time, it put a new perspective on, what transparency really means to me and how that not just informs my ability to defend and protect, but it also inform and be transparent with the business and the consumers.
Yep. I love that. So let's look the flip side of this. A lot of things we've been doing for a long time that maybe we should have stopped a while ago. So give me a security practice that you hate or that you think we ought to have just buried and be done with.
Do we have enough time, Andy? I'm kidding. Listen, data center strategy and a security methodology built around hardware, right? Like, got to be network defined. It has to be on device, on platform, at
Yep.
at bare metal. That doesn't exist like in the future. Dynamic workloads and virtual clustering capabilities across different zones, software defined networks. Like, I think the old data center strategy that we're trying to angle into a multi-cloud ecosystem can't work. First of all,
Mhm.
it cannot work. Secondarily, it's apples and oranges from a protection standpoint, and it reduces your transparency, it reduces your effectiveness, and it reduces your scale. So don't do it. I think, focusing on or embracing cloud capabilities, software defined capabilities, it's how your products are being built. It's how
Yep.
you're delivering to market. It sure as hell should be how you're approaching security. So I think that's probably, the number one thing from my perspective. I still see people, and this is probably the second one, enterprise conversion into cloud.
Yep.
Like, it's not a thing. Like, you can't take an enterprise environment and convert it. You can migrate services into cloud platforms. So that should be your focus. Like, we should stop talking about this enterprise conversion capability. And, I think we talk about SDLC or DevSecOps. We really need to start talking about just how do we shift left and
Mhm.
how do we really, move up that stack into the native aspects of code development and by design programs and get away from standardized capabilities around SDLC. So those are probably my top three at a quote unquote cyber technical level that I think most about.
Yeah, I like those, and they sort of fit into an umbrella. I was recently moderating a boardroom of a group of, CISOs and security directors, and one of them had the most insightful comment. He said, the rest of the business did such a great job of slowing down application developers because it took so long to get hardware, to provision hardware, that we got time to catch up. And in the cloud, we don't have that time anymore. And that sort of fits into your model of when everything was centered around that piece of hardware, like security could always catch up because you could always find the applications because there were only so many boxes out there.
It's true. And there's a beauty in the ease of developing, software defined controls, further to the left in the environment. But the issue around transparency, controls
Yep.
assurance, monitoring, if your system is built on a 2012 stack that's dependent on basic types of integration, you're going to have a much, much more difficult issue to do your basic mission requirements of being able to see something, react to it, defend it, and from a controls or a regulatory reporting perspective, being able to prove it.
Mhm.
And so you really have to rethink that, in today's world.
So for you, if you compared what your expectations were over the last 20 years to what actually happened in the world, what's the biggest surprise for you about that the cloud has brought to us?
Oh, speed and scale. I mean, remember like when you had to like think about how many boxes do I need to order, with how many cores and how much
Yep.
memory in order to support that? Whereas w- we might have a dynamic attack issue, and today in, less than an hour, I can spin up an environment that is 6 times the data center capability
Mhm.
that I was protecting before. Like, I mean, like speed and scale is just insane. I also think with that comes the pace of innovation. I mean, if you think about TikTok and, we truly move at the speed of culture here. And we're always saying that culture starts at TikTok. Therefore, our products has to be at the speed of culture. You got to keep up that pace. And so you have to be able to create new products, new environments, new, production capabilities, and everything that supports it behind it has to be in place. So I think the ability to keep up with culture, it has been really, really interesting to me. And I think this ability to give the business what they want. Like like cloud, when it first came was, our ability to scale, not have data centers, get globalized, get closer to the end users. I think those were all great things. But the ability to give the business what they need, where they need it at any given time, and do it in a secure way has, broadly been a really big plus.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember when that scale and speed really hit me for cloud was actually when HashDOS came out, which you recall was an Apache attack using content length headers or to pull too many things from an origin. It was really bad if you had a CDN in front of you that dealt differently than the origin server did.
Right, and you had to do that across customers, if I
So I had to
recall.
do it across customers, right? So this one
Right.
comes out and we're like, well, we think we know how this works for, Apache because that's what we were running for like our own origin for our website. But like, how does this work on every other web server? So I, call up one of my architects, who's actually changing jobs, I think like today. But I called him up and I said, hey, I need you to go and investigate this and like get a lab environment, deploy every possible web server out there and and configure them to be backends to our service and then like go attack them and figure it out. And so he went to our IT team and they told him 6 weeks. And he wanted like 15 machines.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so he goes to AWS. This is a while ago, so it's not quite as common. Stands them all up. An hour later, I have a report. And he says to me, now, how do I bill this? Because I just like put this on my personal credit card. You didn't even have a corporate card. And I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna get in trouble because you put this on the wrong credit card. So I said to him, what was the bill? He's like, 97 cents. So I pulled $1 out of my pocket. I paid it to him.
There
I
you
said,
go.
you're good. And it was that moment when I was
Yeah,
like, because all that we needed was that handful of machines for 5 minutes each.
yeah,
And that realization that cloud was going to solve that for us in a way that there was no way to do within a data center.
yeah, yeah, and I've certainly I had an education on it over the last few years, but certainly coming to here and the growth capability, I don't even remember the number of virtual servers when I started, but it was, you know, we've gone so far beyond that in
Yep.
2 years with our growth. Like, I couldn't even imagine having procured that many devices, within a year and a half. It's like,
Right.
it's craziness.
Yeah. Let somebody else solve that problem. Just provide you the hardware to run on. I'm a fan of that.
Yeah, yeah, very cool.
Yeah. So as you look forward, so that's what surprised you. What are you most excited about for the opportunities of technology, over the next 5 to 20 years?
So I am a huge, huge believer in ML and AI, right? Like, I think it solves problems. I've been using it for years in financial crimes defense,
Mhm.
obviously in my background in the financial sector. And that has really helped drive trust into, financial instrument delivery. And it just, so that's been important. But now with the speed and feed of, some of these attacks we see and some of these organized criminal capabilities that are operating out of data centers globally that have entire data centers, not like a box that they ripped off somewhere and they're doing something, but you know massive data environments that they're targeting organizations and being able to do it in such unique subvertive ways is that the AI and ML will give us the insight into these massive capabilities,
Mhm.
across so many different parts of our stack. I think I'm excited about. I think we're already seeing, some security technology development companies delivering this in their cloud capabilities, and I'm excited for that. So that's number one. Number two, the advancement in low code environments for defensibility and being able to actually not just migrate workloads anymore, migrate entire environments. Like,
Yeah.
I can, I can. We used to use the move the cheese, right? Bad guy comes in, we have an advanced, threat possibility. How do we move the cheese based on what they're trying to do? So being able to keep it ahead of the adversary, being able to migrate service delivery at speed through the nimbleness of low code environments. Those are two that I get super excited when I think about it, just because it makes my life easier. but it also really gives us, a leg forward to start focusing on the other hard problems. I mean, think about some of the problems we have to do with regards to data sovereignty, data regionality. We can focus on the controls requirements and the capability to attach at the data level. So from identity to disaggregation identity to data to delivery, we can do all of these things in cloud, in region, at scale we've never seen it before. So that has, that to me is like the pinnacle of really achieving an incredible security and privacy enforcement ecosystem through the use of cloud.
Yep. No, I love that. So you've probably learned some hard lessons in your career, and some of them you probably wish you'd learned a little earlier, or maybe somebody had given you advice. So what's the piece of advice you wish you'd gotten earlier than maybe when you got it or had to learn it yourself?
Trust but verify. I think that's one. I put a lot of trust in people. It's just the type of individual I am. I'm a team player. I love working as a team, but as a leader that has accountability, and we have to verify. And include that's across your own teams, across partners, across your business, how you talk to the public about what you're accountable for. I think that's important. The other one I'm always preaching about. So, Andy, this won't be the first time you heard it, won't be the last, but really understanding the entirety of the business, right? Like the old Michael Porter value chain for the MBAs listening in, right? How do we imaginate, a product? How do we develop it? How do we market it? How do we build it? How do we sell it? How do we deliver it? How do we monetize it? And how do we service it? And how do you do it all over again? Like that entire value chain. How do you look at the entirety of the business? It's the ecosystem of that business with internal and external partners, right? Most people aren't doing their own ERP today. Most people aren't doing their, our own marketing infrastructure. Most people have diversified supply chain. That's your responsibility. That's
Yep.
the entirety of the business. You're not just protecting a data center. You're protecting the entirety of that business process. So how do you understand it? How can you do it? And I wish I would have figured that a little bit earlier in my career, but this has been a passion of mine that I'm out there and I like to share with people. Value chain risk assessment is an incredible thing, I think, that helps people really understand what they're protecting so they can develop the right protection. And then probably communications. I mean, I was a military guy. I was in law enforcement. I still say 10-4 every day. I mean, like literally there's a way that you have to communicate with the people that are using your services. And if that's other executives or if that's other parts of the business or, whatever it may be, customers, making sure that people understand the business aspects of what you do. We at programs levels like yours and mine, you're spending, tens of millions of dollars in protecting and defending a business and enabling them to go to market. How do you explain that? What is the value you're delivering? And how do you make sure that not only do the customers understand it and the consumers, but your business does? And so I think that communication was really important. And I mentioned the last one. I always mention to everyone, get a mentor. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're a CEO. It's always great to have someone to talk to because there have been CEOs before you. There's been CSOs before you. There are people that understand broader concepts than you understand, and continue doing that throughout your career.
Great. Well, that's been fantastic, but you've got a stressful job. So what do you do to unwind? Do you actually have a secret TikTok account we could follow, or do you do something else to unwind?
I'm working on that, Andy. I still haven't had the opportunity. I've been too busy saving the world one TikTok at a time. But yeah, you know what? I love spending time with my family. I'm on the road like you, travel the world, a
Yep.
few times a year. And so love being home. COVID from that perspective wasn't horrible for me. I loved spending almost a couple of years, home. So I love to spend a lot of time with my wife and daughters and fishing. I mean, it's kind of like my guilty pleasure. I live on a lake. I just love to fish. And so any opportunity to do that just puts me in a whole different place, a whole different world.
Do you love to catch fish, or do you just love the act of pretending to try to catch fish?
Yes.
Okay, now let's wind up with a piece of wisdom that doesn't have to be about business or technology. What's life advice you like giving out to people?
All right. Number one, write it down. Now, this isn't because I'm getting old and I'm losing, my capabilities for memory. And this is about, I think people do well when they do simple things like write stuff in a table and then prioritize. So I always tell people, like, when you're thinking about hard problems, just write it down. You can decide what goes in the next column and the next column, but write it down so it becomes clearer, I think, to many people. Second, don't be afraid to take on new challenges. I took this job knowing that it was going to be a challenge, knowing that there were all different types of pressures and issues, but had an incredible opportunity to do something I've never done before. And, people shouldn't be afraid of going out of, their comfort zone to pursue something that they haven't done. Selfishly, I think people should spend a little bit more time outside of working on them and help work on others. And this is all around inspiration, being a leader, being someone that others can look up to, and really, and from a practitioner standpoint, getting other people into cyber, spend time in school, spend time with NIST, spend time with different organizations that get kids from early, in middle school and high school to university, really thinking about this space.
Well, I know you'll appreciate I'm working on that giving back on the leadership front. I'm actually just finished the first draft of my book on leadership that will be published on April 18th, 2023. So you've got some time to plan for buying that.
All right. I want my signed copy.
Oh, absolutely. Well, really, Roland, thank you for joining us today. You've dropped some great wisdom.
I appreciate it. It's always great chatting with you, even if it's not in the backyard, eating a steak, off your grill. It's, this is great. And I'm looking forward to the next time.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Cloud Security Reinvented podcast. I'm your host, Andy Ellis, and I hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you for checking out this episode of Cloud Security Reinvented, brought to you by Orca Security. Orca Security detects and prioritizes cloud security risks for AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud without the gaps in coverage, alert fatigue, and operational costs of agents. Please follow Cloud Security Reinvented wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit orca.security/podcast to get immediate access to all of the latest episodes.